Parasite Eve was lightning in a bottle. Square's adaptation of Hideaki Senna's popular psychological body horror novel, Parasite Eve, was a cult hit back in the 90s, and one that's still remembered fondly to this day. I played it for the first time earlier this year, and was pleasantly surprised at not only how much it's held up, but how invested it got me into the franchise. I read bits and pieces of the translated novel, I beat the video game, I even watched that weird movie all the way through. It was an example of a company using an IP to create something not only unique, but thematically similar to the source material. It helps that they had the original writer on the team, but still. So of course, in true video game fashion, Parasite Eve, the sequel, or maybe adaptation, to a book named Parasite Eve, would get its own sequel, Parasite Eve 2. This game, by all means, shouldn't exist.
So yo, it's Austin, and it's still Square Enix Month. Today, for the very first time on this channel, we're gonna be looking at a direct sequel with Parasite Eve 2.
It's hard to discuss this without some context, and it's been a minute since my Parasite Eve 1 video, so let's run this down. Spoilers, obviously. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria Eve appears and melts people. Aya Bria is our protagonist, a cop of the NYPD who also possesses these powers and grows over time, except she's not inherently evil. Aya's mother was maybe Mariko from the book and movie, but I'm not sure. Manhattan is overrun by melty goo. Aya begins to embrace her powers. Science stuff happens and it ends with a big showdown. A destroyed Statue of Liberty and Navy tanker. You know, the usual. Those who play the original might be like, what about all the intellectual dialogue about evolution, human genes, the philosophical discussion surrounding humanity's existence being a parasite in the same manner as mitochondrial Eve? Well, I remember that, but I'm not really sure that Parasite Eve 2 did. It's like the difference between Alien and Aliens. The first being this slow-paced horror film where you felt a sense of dread for the crew of the Nostromo and Ripley the entire time. The alien being an off-screen presence the majority of the movie that left you wondering. Parasite Eve 2, on the other hand, is more similar to Aliens, where it's like, yo, xenomorphs, those were dope, let's shoot them all. Not that I would ever compare Parasite Eve to Ridley Scott's masterpiece, but at least James Cameron's Aliens didn't have tank controls. Parasite Eve 2 isn't a bad game by any means, it's just not the kind of thing you'd imagine would come out of a book that was basically a kidney transplant tutorial. After the highly traumatic events of Parasite Eve that left Aya presumably under control from Eve or doing some kind of weird heel turn, or oh yeah, there's also the secret ending where Maya prevents Aya from being taken over, because she's alive, apparently. That depends on how much of the Chrysler building you were willing to put up with, which in my case was not much. Eve 2 presumably follows the second ending, having Aya depart the NYPD to run off to LA, where she joins the FBI and the MIST division, where she hunts down NMCs, or sometimes ANMCs. Y'all like acronyms? For those of you who speak English, this means Aya joined the Mitochondrial Investigation and Suppression Team to exterminate neo-mitochondrial creatures, some of which are artificially created, hence the A. Yeah, basically, Aya joined a kill squad for weird icky goo demon creatures. After the highly personal story that Parasite Eve had, with the virus being directly related to her, Aya decides to run around the West Coast, slinging her guns around, using her parasite energy magic powers to defeat bad guys. Video games. From here, Aya is sent on a 2-disc long journey where she investigates recent mitochondria monster sightings and an ANMC terrorist called Number 9. He's your basic screechy insane bad guy who uses a gun blade? Okay. Whatever, I unlock one too. Eventually, you run into a resident cool guy, Kyle, and he's like, hey, sup, I'm just chilling. There's a dead dudes on water towers, and the only person living in this mitochondria zombie-infested hellhole is Gary and his dope dog, Flint. Flint's a good boy and you better protect him. Then, after a day of investigation, fighting terrorists, and farting around, Aya takes a shower and then boom, shoot the gun. Wowee, that was the biggest one yet. Psst, end of the last last game had a giant dinosaur, but it at least made thematical sense. Immediately, fans of the original, including myself, might have been put off by this. One of the interesting things about Parasite Eve was how threatening Eve was. Anytime she would enter a room with people, she would kill all of them. They would melt. She had power over everyone's bodies. Eve would alter people's DNA in order to turn them into these horrible monstrosities or LCL goo. You knew it was her directly influencing the things around you. Parasite Eve 2, on the other hand, treats this like your standard zombie virus, where sometimes people are like, blah, and body horror happens. Yucky.
But hey, that's just the premise. Parasite Eve 2 actually makes a lot of changes in other areas as well, like just about everything. The original Parasite Eve was an interesting take on the Resident Evil formula, and Parasite Eve 2, just kind of Resident Evil. Parasite Eve 2 released in December of 1999, a mere year and a half after the original. Weirdly though, a majority of lead developers of the original had little to nothing to do with the sequel other than like Tetsuya Nomura, who by the way is at peak proto-Nomura. But the biggest difference here is in the combat and controls. Parasite Eve was cool because it combined a Final Fantasy-esque random battle system with the evasion systems of something like Robotron. A lot of your battles would be shown from a top-down camera angle, and you had to learn enemy attacks to dodge. You could also press a button and move in that direction. The sequel, however, decided to take a very, very large step back and embrace a control scheme that was identical to Resident Evil. Yeah, that's the tank control part. Despite the DualShock controller being a thing that already existed at this point. For those of you out there who aren't aware of what a tank control is, because you aren't a boomer like myself, this is an archaic control scheme. Similar to a tank or car even, you can only move forwards or backwards. In order to turn your character, you have to press left or right to then face the direction you want to look, then you can move forward. It's not like Parasite Eve 1 where you just press left and go left. It's too easy, I guess. Personally, I think this was an awful decision. There's a reason Parasite Eve is seen as a classic while the sequel has a mixed reception, and maybe it's not just tank controls, but I sure hate it. I think this type of control scheme can be effective in certain places. Resident Evil 4 and 5 use it in the 3D space well enough, even if the movement is a little unnatural and weird to look at. However, the PlayStation 1 incarnation of this sure isn't very fun in this day and age, at least to me. I think Parasite Eve 2's insistence on switching to this type of control scheme really says a lot, and it didn't feel like a proper sequel to me. So I did some digging, and well, turns out this wasn't supposed to be a sequel. After the original success, which might have been partially due to the little demo disc, Square was like, hey, let's make a spin-off in this world starring this guy, Kyle. But let's lean a little heavier into the whole survival horror thing that people have been doing. In fact, let's just bring in Kenichi Iwao, the dude who wrote Resident Evil, and let him write and direct. Ooh, but you know what? Screw all that, let's just make it Parasite Eve 2. I mean, Aya's the main character. Kyle can stay. I think it's easy to tell that this was originally going to be something different considering the ambiguous nature of Parasite Eve's ending. I couldn't find anything from Hideaki Sena, the original writer, in regards to this game's existence, so it's hard to tell, but I guess it was all Square on this one. But let's stop complaining for a second. Parasite Eve 2, despite my reservations, does have a lot of really neat stuff going on, so let's talk about that. Visually, Parasite Eve is probably one of the best I've seen on the PlayStation 1. The opening sequence has us controlling Aya in a hybrid of gameplay and pre-rendered backgrounds where it moves alongside the player, similar to the beginning of Final Fantasy VIII, but a bit more complicated. It's like, yo, what? How'd you do that? But beyond that, the character models look so much better than the first game and even flagship titles like Final Fantasy VIII. It's likely due to the scale of the game being smaller, but being able to see a good amount of detail on those low poly models is quite the aesthetic. It's definitely better than looking at whatever this is. Oh yeah, the CGs are less funny looking too. Plus this one has the shower scene. Plus, this one has the shower scene, which was probably a majority of the budget. She looks so much better than this. The pre-rendered art is nothing to scoff at either, and tons of rooms have an attempt at storytelling, even if it's not subtle at all. It's just unfortunate that some areas in this game are so dark you're unable to tell what anything is. During a sewer part, I had to cross my fingers and hope I was touching walls. A stark contrast to Parasite Eve 1, which, while it had its darker areas, still was visible on a TV without cranking the brightness up. However, the in-game cutscenes are pretty dope. It's
It's not the press button to advance the world's longest dialogue like the original, but instead plays out automatically with multiple pre-rendered camera angles and small, janky but cute animations for the characters. It makes Aya and the others feel more alive, even if the world would be absolutely dreadful to live in. For example, after the first major mission, you're sent to a small country town called Dryfield, and this place is the worst. Every corner has NMCs, dead bodies, blood, locked doors, and giant goat zombies. It's the works. It's like a supreme pizza of horror cliches. But the pre-rendered stuff looks good. The music is also pretty decent. It lacks the charm that Yoko Shimomura tossed down before, that charm being the soulless, lack of life, empty sound she created. That's a weird thing to say. Naoshi Mizuta was in charge this time, and he previously worked on Resident Evil 2, go figure, though he did work on Final Fantasy 11, and that's good with me. All of this is pretty solid. It's just such a shame that playing through Parasite Eve 2 as a fan of the original is such a letdown. A letdown sponsored by Coca-Cola. Oh yeah!
One of the things that made Parasite Eve really special was how it went out of the way to differentiate itself from other survival horror games at the time. However, Square's insistence on imitating the thing that did bigger number just kind of sucks to play.
I think most people want to like Parasite Eve 2 more than they do, but it's filled with too many differences and weird choices. Inventory management in a game is never an extremely exciting thing to deal with, and Parasite Eve 2 gives you a ton of different items, including like weapons, ammo types, different levels of healing items, which isn't unusual. But I will say, transporting items from my broken down car to a new truck was an unfun pain in the ass. I only have so much time to play video games, and I'm spending it transporting ammo from a storage bin to another storage bin. Sick. And well, this is a majority of my experience with Parasite Eve 2. Tedium, annoyance, wanting to like the game more than it allowed me to. Parasite Eve was a fantastic cult hit, one that even though I only played for the first time this year, stood out higher than new releases. In trying to replicate other games, 2 didn't understand its own design philosophy. Puzzles aren't just cryptic, but downright time wasters if you don't use a guide. Interfacing with these puzzles feels awful, something that Myst understood 6 years prior. Preemptively dodging enemies with tank controls is not a fun thing to do, especially when Parasite Eve 2 throws a majority of every enemy you fight off screen. Aya has this auto lock-on system that you might as well just spam anytime you enter a room. You can kind of see enemy placement on the GPS if you have it equipped, so you can just blindly fire at whatever's off screen. Is it gonna charge at you? Maybe. Just throw a fireball at it. Hopefully it'll work. And in true game fashion, you have to relearn all of your Parasite abilities. Video games. Spoilers incoming. Just about everyone I've talked to about this game has given me a somewhat mixed response, and I'm inclined to agree. Though maybe I feel a bit more extreme. The story completely misses the mark. It takes the climax of an action movie and throws a giant NMC at you and is like, you gotta fight. It's revealed that all of the artificial NMCs were created using Aya's DNA, and she's like, ah, damn, that sucks. Then she finds her sister Eve. Kind of. Is actually Aya's twin clone thing? Like Paul Rudd and Paul Rudd, but one of them's clueless and the other's Ant-Man? But basically, Aya's led to this underground facility by Kyle where she finds out about a shadow government and scientists doing experiments to create a master race of super mitochondria humans, but it's really just like gore and like, it's kind of underwhelming. The mitochondria Eve from the original is mentioned in name only, taking out some of the overarching paranoia and fear and just turning Parasite Eve into a big monster slayfest, instead of the creepy body horror that it was. If you can't tell, I didn't like this one. It's so strange to me that a sequel can fall so far from the tree. It's really hard to play games with the traditional PlayStation 1 tank control scheme in 2019, especially when you were never fond of it in the first place, and this was kind of a deal breaker for me. I think I could have put up with the less than stellar storytelling and plot if the game controlled like a normal game, but unfortunately that was not the case. And also the ending is kind of like, oh, we did it, saved the day, let's get coffee. Parasite Eve 2 sold well enough to get a bestseller print in Japan, but that was about it. This sequel to an adaptation based off of a book released, and that would be the last we would hear from Parasite Eve. Well, until 2010 anyways. But I don't know if I'll do that one. Wooly gave me a warning. Hideaki Senna's fantastic novel seems to be the start of a franchise that never truly took off. But how could it? The concept lends itself to a singular conflict, maybe two at best. With power scaling and escalation, there's only so far you can take the idea before it wears out its welcome. I'll still highly recommend the original game, and even the movie is an interesting watch. But Parasite Eve 2 feels very close to being a cash grab. Square crossing their fingers, hoping to bottle lightning twice. No, not that lightning.
And well, that's Parasite Eve 2. Perhaps cash grab is a kind of a strong sentiment, but it's hard not to feel that way when you can literally see Square going through the motions to try to grab those thick resi bucks. Maybe one day I'll come back to the franchise to give the third birthday a shot, but I really don't want to do that. But you know what? That cutscene I really liked as a kid, the one with the shower, I'm finally old enough to play that game. By like 10 years.
Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Alfredo Ariano, Brandon Howell, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Cliff Pro, Dig Muguruza, Donald Dowdy, David Molnar, Eli Shane Staufenecker, Flaming Fighter, Irrational, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Josh Garbage Lord, Legend Gary, Nitron, Filamentus, Plasma Phoenix, Ronnie Vile, and Vlad Lust. Thank you very much for your support. I know it's been like a month, but I did it. I'm sorry it took so long. New videos coming out next week. Also, happy Thanksgiving. That's just around the corner, y'all. I'm back. Sorry.